Welcome to this event honouring the life, works and legacy of Professor Ama Ata Aidoo. My name is Lydia Ayame Hiraide. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Feminist Centre for Racial Justice, and the FCRJ focuses on the majority world as geographies from which to build feminist imaginaries of race. So the centre brings together fields of inquiry that have developed in parallel, in particular feminist theories on power, protests and change, studies of diasporas, critical race theories, and migration studies. So you can find out more about the centre by visiting our website, which is www.thefeministcentre.org. Tonight, we've got a really stellar lineup as we reflect on, as I said, the life, works and legacy of Ama Ata Aidoo. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our fabulous chair, Dr. Renée Landell, who will perhaps say a bit about herself and our speakers and this event. Over to you, Renée.
Apologies, you were talking all this time and I was not hearing you, but that was my fault. So anyway, hello everybody. Just quickly, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Renée Landell, but for the sake of this meeting, because it's going to be really relaxed and really chill, and we're just going to have hopefully a very warm and inviting conversation. So I'm Renée Landell. I'm a literary and cultural scholar. I specialise in Caribbean literatures of slavery, Black British writing and African eco-criticism. I'm also a visual artist, writer and public speaker, and it's really my honour to be here today and to chair this conversation. So I want to first start by saying a massive thank you to the Feminist Centre for Racial Justice and Dr. Hiraide specifically for bringing us all together for this conversation. And it really is an honour today. We're going to be talking about the legacy of an incredible woman, incredible activist, and I have two women who are joining me in this conversation today who I would love to introduce. The first one is Nana Darkoa Sekyiamah, who is the author of the acclaimed 2021 book, The Sex Lives of African Women, which amplifies extraordinary and powerful stories of women from across the African continent and its global diaspora. Publishers Weekly described the book as an astonishing report on the quest for sexual liberation, which is a really glowing review. It was also listed by The Economist as the best book of the year. Nana is also co-founder of Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women, which is a website, a podcast, and a festival that publishes and creates content that tells stories of African women's experiences around sex, sexualities, and pleasure. In 2022, she was cited by the BBC in its list of 100 inspirational and influential women from around the world. And the following year, New Africa magazine listed her as one of 100 inspirational Africans. Nana, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and so I and Nana are also joined by Barby Asante, who is an artist, curator, and educator, whose practice spans film, performance, collective writing, and social practice. Her work offers transformative spaces for ritual and healing and delves into the intricate dynamics of place, space, and memory. In doing so, her work aims to unearth and dismantle the enduring impacts of slavery and colonialism in our contemporary experiences. Barby creates intimate spaces for reflection, inviting collaborators, contributors, and viewers to engage in dialogues about the complex politics of race, gender, space, and place, many of which we're going to talk about today. And her ongoing performance and installation project, Declaration of Independence, can be viewed at Notting Hill, Bethnal Green, and Stratford stations until January 2025. And we're going to hear a little bit about that project as well. So Barby, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, and so without further ado, I'm actually going to invite Dr. Hiraide back, and we're going to start by watching a short video of the woman whose legacy we have all come to honour today, Professor Ama Ata Aidoo. And so the video is just a really short clip, it's about 3 minutes long, and then we'll get into our discussion. So over to you, Lydia.
My point is that when a woman has been socialized into, I don't want to use the word oppressed, right? But when a woman has been put under pressure, when she's been socialized into a certain space, and she is being that woman in that space, that doesn't mean that, that's all there is to her. My problem with seeing African women as, the quintessentially world oppressed and so on and so forth, is that it removes any agency from African women, as if we are just there, to be oppressed, to make babies. And mind you, if you don't mind my saying it, excuse me, I mean, it's not all African societies that practice female genital mutilation. And Africa is not the only place where it is done.
It happens in the Middle East as well.
Yes,
okay, so you have said that you're very averse to this Western perception that the African world perception that the African female is a downtrodden wretch. You're also seen as the perhaps paramount African feminist. Do you describe yourself as a feminist?
I am a feminist, yeah.
And you don't think that's a bit of a loaded term that's associated with the 1970s women's liberation movement, women burning their bras in Western capitals?
So what if they were burning their bras? I mean, the feminists, if you say that, a feminist is just somebody, not necessarily a woman, who believes in the potential of women to get to the highest possible level of development, given the facilities a society makes available. I mean, just as any man. And being a feminist is not necessarily being a woman feminist. Feminism is an ideology, like socialism, like Pan-Africanism. So, a man too can be a feminist.
Do you believe then that feminism is feminism regardless of wherever you live in the world, whether it's Norway or Nigeria, or do you believe that there is an African feminism more strongly rooted in the social traditions and culture of these countries?
I certainly do believe, it is...
What, that there is an African feminism?
Well, I think there is an African feminism that does not go around describing itself as an African feminism. What I'm trying to say is that feminism is an ideology, an ideology, and it depends how it is formulated or how it is negotiated, depends upon the details of the particular environment.
Given a little bit of an overview as best as I can there, and I think it's a great segue to ask the first question, which is, what led you to Ama Ata Aidoo's life and works? And this question basically invites you to tell the story of how you encountered her work. Is there a story? So I'm gonna ask Nana if she can go first.
Hi, happy to go. So I first encountered Ama Ata Aidoo's work when I was in secondary school. So in Ghana, her books are on the curriculum. And I think usually when a book is on the curriculum, you don't necessarily appreciate it until you come to the book as an adult, when you have made the decision to engage with the book. And the moment at which I started to really appreciate Ama Ata Aidoo was when I turned 19. Coincidentally, at the time, I was in a university here in the UK, and I was studying cultural studies. And a part of my course was on feminism. And feminism was primarily introduced to me through the lens of African-American writers like Bell Hooks and Michelle Wallace. And I felt this resonance. Everything was suddenly making sense to me, right? And this was also within the context of being a Ghanaian girl, now living in the UK, coming to an understanding of the complexities of race, starting to understand gender and how it intersects with other issues. And then I was like, well, where are the African feminists? And then I rediscovered Ama Ata Aidoo, and it was like my mind was blown, because here was a Ghanaian feminist, a proud Ghanaian feminist who was speaking to these issues in ways that I understood and got. And that's how I came to the work of Ama Ata Aidoo, and I just fell in love with her. And, subsequently, and I can talk more about that later, I got to know her personally, and she was just this amazing, inspirational force of a woman. Yeah, so let me just stop here because I can talk about Ama Ata Aidoo forever.
Yes, I will actually ask you about your personal relationship with her later. And what I'm hearing there is that she not only shaped your childhood, but your adulthood too. So really your life's journey.
So I wouldn't say she shaped my childhood because I didn't appreciate her.
Yeah.
But she inspired me in my understanding of being an African feminist. She helped me see that feminism wasn't a foreign thing, right? It was something that I could look up to her as a model of a Ghanaian feminist and know, it is possible to be a feminist and to be Ghanaian, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Barbie, same question. What led you to her life and works?
So, just like Nana, I was also at college, I think, looking at exactly the same people. We were definitely reading Michelle Wallace. We were definitely reading bell hooks and others, and a lot of literature. And I was very into literature at the time, reading Shange and other people. And yeah, and a lot of the focus was on American writers. And we had great bookshops in Brixton, and I picked up Our Sister Killjoy. And I think for me, that book was very it was just, I think one of the things that really took me, I think, is the structure, this kind of poetic storytelling, and also this kind of the way that it's quite fractured and anecdotal in ways, but also really capturing these very, very sort of specific moments of encounter, I would say, between the West, someone who is from Ghana and the West, and a way of seeing it. And I kind of put it away for a while, and I think 2016, when my grandmother passed away, and I sort of began to revisit Ama Ata Aidoo's work, I think because it kind of, my grandmother is also, and my mum are also born in Salt Pond, so they were also born so it kind of helped me to really sort of, I think, to sort of try and understand the spaces that my mother, and the context that my mother and my grandmother was coming from. And so that's when I sort of picked up her poetry and revisited the work, Our Sister Killjoy work, because I've also made work using text from Our Sister Killjoy, because that just really speaks to this like horror, this tension that I'm kind of exploring between the West and kind of trying to be present here and trying to create an identity, and seeing the bullshit of it all. That's the best way I can describe it, like the bullshit of this kind of world. And I really love, actually, that, and I have borrowed from that the original title was Reflections on the Black-Eyed Squint, and I've borrowed from that for a piece of work that I have, which is The Queen and the Black-Eyed Squint, because I think this very perceptive way in which she sees things was really, really important to helping me to sort of develop my thinking in these last kind of few years, like these last 10 years or so.
Yes, and I really love how you've spoken there a little bit about power of literature to kind of inform our understanding of ideologies and our perceptions of the world. And that's really, really important. We're going to touch on that in a little while. But Nana, you said that you had a personal relationship with Ama Ata Aidoo. And I know that you also, know her daughter as well. Could you talk a little bit to us about your memories of Professor Aidoo and the kind of person she was and how she may have influenced your own life and works?
So I first met Professor Aidoo when I went back to Ghana in, I want to say 2006, to work as a communications officer for the African Women's Development Fund. And at the time, she had a literary organization called Mbasem that was funded by AWDF. And I was the communications officer. And I decided to start a newsletter And she was the very first person I interviewed. And of course, I was strategic in picking her for that interview because I wanted to get to know her. And she was just so warm and just so generous, which is how I'll always remember her. I felt like she was just supportive of young African women right up until she died, right? I normally live in Ghana. I happen to be in the UK at the moment, but I normally live in Ghana. She would come to as many literary events as possible, and she would always support us. I remember her running a workshop at AWDF. Well, she wasn't running the workshop. Actually, Yewande Omotoso was running the workshop. Yewande is an amazing Nigerian, Barbadian, South African writer. And we'd invited Ama Ata Aidoo as like a guest to share some insights with us. And that was just how she was. Even though her health wasn't the best, she would show up. I remember maybe even 2 years ago, it may not have even been 2 years, there was a university in the States that had invited her for this online talk. And they were asking her what book she was reading. And she was talking about reading my book, and I felt like that was just so incredibly generous of her. And that is just how I knew her. She always found an opportunity to big up a younger writer, to big up creatives, to defend young feminists, to speak up against homophobia in Ghana, which is something that people of her generation tend not to do. I felt like wherever she saw there was something unjust going on, she would just say it. And, in Ghana, traditionally we respect women of a certain generation, right? So for me, it's like admirable when people like her use their power and status to speak up for, in a sense, groups that are being marginalized, like queer people. And she did this boldly, and at the same time, she's the kind of person who has the ear of the president, right? Because she has also been involved in party politics in the past, right? And yeah, that was just the kind of person she is. And also, that's how I met her daughter, Akina, who is a very dear friend, and also an incredible book blogger and reviewer. So in a sense, we're all part of the literary community. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that was really powerful and touching on how, your encounter, and I was really struck by how you found her reading your book. And I think that's really important, we're talking about legacy today. And I think it's really important to reflect on how some of the older generations amplified not only our voices, but various voices, as you said. And I think that's really, really important to remember and think about as we're talking about legacy. And even in reverse, coming to you now, Barbie, you have developed a work called the Declaration of Independence, which pays homage almost. It's an ode to a kind of response to Ama Ata Aidoo's poem, As Always, a Painful Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
So just explain a little bit, just for our audience, a little bit about the project. It's a performative forum designed to mirror the conference halls that were used to negotiate and produce treaties of independence, coalitions, trade deals, manifestos, and policies. And I know that it's a video installation which involves live performances and sound pieces and so much more. Can you talk to us about this piece and how your work responds to Aidoo's work more broadly?
Thank you for that. I wanted to just say how jealous I am of Nana's relationship with her. I got to go to her funeral last year, which was really a beautiful event. And I think also within the context of like things that Nana was speaking about, like, the LGBTQI bill, I thought it was really important. I mean, she had a state, kind of ceremony. And I did think at points there was like little bits of shade from the president that was just like, this woman had us like, she really did do some incredible work there. And I think it's, like you said, it's a kind of homage. The work is, I'd say it's a study. I like to use the kind of Fred Moten and Stefano Hani kind of idea of a notion of study, like the things we do together. So kind of when I started to think about the life of my grandmother, who died in 2016 when she was 102, and she died singing praises to the Lord. as our grandmothers do. I wanted to sort of make a work that sort of really responded to this notion of an intimacy and distance, because I didn't really know her. My Twi my Fanti is not that good, so but even in my big 40-something self, my visits to Ghana, she would put my body on her lap and just kind of her little skinny body. But so I wanted to kind of think about how to have a relationship, and I actually made this invitation to I found this poem, and I made an invitation to many other kind of women of color who were in my circle to be in a conversation with me for a piece of work that I was calling Intimacy and Distance, that I was making for the Diaspora Pavilion in Venice in 2017. And their responses, and I'd written a poem as well that I shared with them, was to write a poem back. So they wrote a poem back. So everybody, it sort of started very accidentally like that. They wrote a poem back, and then it seems like we were in a process of being in dialogue already with her. And then in 2017, the Diaspora Pavilion opened, and a month after it opened, Khadija Say, who was one of the artists in the space, died in the Grenfell Tower fire. And it felt really, really important to somehow, I think, in a kind of conversation with the spirit, was to kind of make this into a much more solid project that would allow many, many voices to be in conversation about this notion of declaration of independence. Now, I think I should probably just tell you a little bit about this poem. I don't actually have it. I didn't think to have it present with me to read it, but I think I can give you a real context of this poem. So this poem speaks to, is for Ama, and it speaks to this notion of declaring oneself, right? But declaring oneself's independence, not just from in terms of the relationship to Ghana and its independence in 57, in terms of the state, but also an independence in terms of women having their own self-determination. Self-determination, I wouldn't just say against men, but also in the light of men, like saying, yes, you could help me, but you don't. So I'm going to take my space. It's a declaration about taking up one's own space, and one's own position, and also being in an act of refusal. So also at the end she says, "I am gone. You will not find me at the meeting. I am gone." So basically it's from that moment, I think, for me, of the being gone, of the refusal, that we have an opportunity to redefine the way that one positions oneself as a independent but also interdependent person, as in a kind of feminist narrative. And in many ways, although I'm drawing from an African feminism or a kind of relationship to African feminism, that's not the context that shaped me. And my context is shaped by being Black British and that feminism, and it's where we meet. And then I meet other people. So I've worked with over 100 women of color, trans, non-binary folks in the UK, actually across the world, because Barbados, in Berlin, in Bergen, and everybody has been from all over the world, from Namibia to Palestine to Libya, to Colombia. So we've had all of these different people, and we've all been in dialogue somehow. And I think that's what was really interesting for me. The Declaration of Independence is a declaration of our interdependence as feminists.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much. I'm struck by the line, "I am gone," and this idea of refusal and resistance. And that to me is creating the kind of political frameworks, would you say, of the piece? And I was thinking also, Nana, about your work, your book, The Sex Lives of African Women. And, you know, it's a book that explores, as I said at the beginning, how African women navigate their sexual identities and experiences. And it's a book that challenges norms and offers new perspectives that highlight their resistance and activism through sex. And then the book, therefore, may be described as a political work. So I wanted to throw out this question to you both, and it might be a bit of a difficult question, but in your own words, and probably a sentence or two, or you can have the time. How would you describe the relationship between art and politics? And is it an effective relationship? Is there a relationship? So I'll start with you, Nana.
So I'm actually going to share something that Ama Ata Aidoo said in that workshop that I mentioned, right? Yeah. She said that if you are political, it will show in your writing. So you don't need to set out to write something political, but just by virtue of being someone who is politicized, who has a particular awareness, consciousness about an issue, that will come across in your writing. And for me, that was really, really helpful, right? Because it tells you that you don't need to try too hard. You know, you just need to be, and then create your art. And your art would have a message, not because you're setting out to do it in a very conscious way, but because that is who you are. And for me, that's really helpful. Because you know, there are lots of artists who say, and when I say artists, I'm categorizing artists very broadly, right? So writers, all sorts of creatives, who said, I'm an artist, right? I'm not political. With me, I'm a writer because I'm a feminist. If I wasn't a feminist, I wouldn't be a writer. But I have also learned from Ama Ata Aidoo that I don't need to try like to push a particular message. I just need to do the kind of writing that most inspires me. And no doubt that would be a political project. You know, so my book, The Sex Lives of African Women, is very much a political project, because I felt like the world had and has a very myopic view of African women's sexuality. And there wasn't this awareness, and there isn't this awareness of the breadth and depth of our sexuality, the spectrum of our desires. There wasn't this focus on us as people with agency who made choice. And I felt that what I knew was very different. And I wanted to put a variety of experiences in a book. And I didn't have to do it in a self-conscious way. Literally, everybody apart from one person that I interviewed made it in the book. And the only reason that particular person didn't make it in the book was because, you know, they didn't really say very much about sex and sexuality. And if I was at a different point in my book project, I would have just had a second interview with a person, because obviously speaking about personal, intimate issues can be challenging. And with some people, I had several conversations. But it so happened that I was at a stage where I was feeling pretty done with the book. I'd worked on it for 5 years and I didn't want to do a subsequent interview, right? And for me, the lesson is we actually all have something to share. We all have interesting stories. And for me, that's the connection between art and politics, right? If you have a particular consciousness, it will come out in your art. You don't need to try too hard.
I have a follow-up question for you on that point, but Barbie, I would like to hear from you. Is there a relationship between art and politics?
Yeah, I'm gonna 100% agree with Nana, and I'm gonna also offer this possibility that your book also somehow follows on from Changes, a love story. You know, just thinking about when I read it, and I thought, you know, the way that maybe in Ama's time she couldn't necessarily have that same articulation of thinking about sex and women's relationships, but she did a very powerful job and a very interesting job in Changes, which my friend and I read when we were in residence at Lotad, and we were just like talking about it all the time. So I think I absolutely agree. I think it also has a lot to do with context, right? I think there's a real thing that is believed in the kind of art world that, you know, particularly when you take it from being educated in these kind of white in establishments, and also, you know, you can say the same when if people are even educated in like African establishments, when the kind of Europe is centered, right? That there's this notion of an objectivity, and it's just not possible. You know, it's as political for an artist, a visual artist like I know Rothko or whatever, to make these like abstract, you know, kind of supposedly empty images, as it is for us to make the kind of content that we make. You know, everything that we do is contributing to the political project, and in many ways that's the point of being storytellers and artists in a way, because we are, you know, kind of creating ways for people to be able to articulate complex things that are kind of difficult to articulate, and also to be a reflection on the world, like to hold a mirror up to the world, and to actually be able to sort of see ourselves. I'm going to go a little bit Ama again, because I was really also pleased to be able to see the play A Dilemma of a Ghost, and I thought it was, when you put it in the context of that time as well, when she was writing it in the late 60s, early 70s, it really made sense about this kind of this tense relationship between the kind of African and African American, this diaspora. So it gave space for a conversation to be had, you know, in a way that that kind of also allows us to ask questions about what it is that we're doing to try and connect, or think about the different histories that kind of connect us. So I think that's, and if nobody's doesn't know that work as well, it's the story of a man that comes home with his African American wife, and just the kind of relationship, the way that she's received, but also the way that she kind of acts up as well, because she's like thinking, I'm super modernist in this country, and just kind of how these tensions just live, but also somehow come together in the end. And I think that's what we need to be doing, asking questions, and I think that's what happens through practicing in this way. And I love what Nana said before, is just like, you said, I am a writer because I'm a feminist, you know? I think that's just beautiful, and I appreciate you saying that.
Yes, very beautiful. And also, Barbie, you touched on the kind of almost impossibility of being objective, almost. And so the idea that I wanted to, there's a follow-up question that I had, and I hope this isn't too difficult but to think about, but as you were both speaking, I was thinking about a new relationship between art and being. And is art always reflective of who we are? Can it ever be objective, or is that impossible?
I mean, I think like Barby was saying, I feel like objectivity is a myth, and people need to own and acknowledge the positions where they're coming from. And the people who claim to be neutral actually usually come from very powerful positions, and their power is invisible to them, right? Yeah, I don't think it's possible to be objective, or even desirable to be objective. I feel like when you're claiming to be objective, you're hiding. Frankly, you're lying. Yeah.
You say art is always reflective of who we are even when we're not trying.
Sorry, say that again. You broke up briefly.
Oh, so sorry. I was saying, would you agree then that art is always reflective of who we are even when we're not trying?
I think so. Yeah, either consciously or unconsciously.
Yes. Yeah. Barbie, do you want to add?
100% agree. And I think you can, if you follow often, I think following a writer often, or following an artist over a significant period of time, if they don't fall into the, I'm going to speak to visual arts mostly, because I do think that visual artists, and though some writers are doing it now, have a tendency to feed the market. So when they feed the market, they they start to like reperform their work, right? But if you allow yourself to just evolve, I'm going to just give a shout out because there's a friend of mine's partner who's a saxophonist who's been just really evolving in the most beautiful way. He was a saxophonist, now plays flute, and I see this kind of proper authentic way in which you can just, you know, just be a reflection of who you are, and you will see the changes in someone, you know, as they kind of move on, and the ways in which they grow. And I think Ama Ata Aidoo is a really brilliant example of that. But, I mean, she wrote her first pieces when she was very young. In fact, I can't remember exactly how young she was, but the first one, she wanted a pair of shoes, and so she wrote this story for this magazine, and she won. And I have some of these very old like Darkoa books that she contributed to as Christina, you know. But you can see this trajectory and this growth and this difference and the different life experiences, you know, like in the poetry book, An Angry Letter in January, from which the Declaration of Independence, as always, a Declaration of Independence, also has poems for Kina, and also speaks about her experience of living in Kenya, and just kind of also the kind of politics that was surrounding at that time. And I think if you bring your really like authentic voices, you will definitely be able to. It's almost like autobiography through the poetry, through the work, you know. So yeah, that's what I would offer. I just think that otherwise you're hiding, you know. And
yeah, you've given us much to think about there. It's almost like autobiography. That is really fascinating. I'm gonna definitely take that away. And what you said, Nana, about, you know, being a writer, you write because you're a feminist. And it comes to my next question. Ama Ata Aidoo famously named herself a feminist, and her political approach has often been described as Pan-Africanist. So there's that relationship again between art and politics. How does her work and political thought help us to think about and address themes of gender and race and class? I'm gonna leave you to think about that question, and I'm gonna revisit it. But I just think, for our audience sake, because I know that, you know, there's some who may not be familiar with the definitions of these terms. So feminism, we're really going to draw on Aidoo's definition here. It's believing in the potential of women to get to the highest possible level of development. We're going to stay with that definition for this talk. And Pan-Africanism, which really calls and highlights the idea that all people of African descent have common interests and should be unified. And so Pan-Africanists believe that unity is vital to social, economic, and political progress. And its central aim is to uplift, to edify, and to unify people of African descent. So I hope that gives a clarification for you all. But to revisit the question, how does Aidoo's work and political thought help us to think about and address themes of gender, race, and class? I know we've touched on some of this already, but what, in your perspective? We'll start with you, Nana.
Yeah, I feel like for me, Ama Ata Aidoo is a model of how to create and to build intentionally across borders, right? Now I'm trying to remember the name. I think the name is Nawi Nawi, right? And Barby, you may know more about this or even remember some more of the details. But she started many years ago an initiative with an African-American writer. I think her name is maybe Jane Cortez or something along that lines. And they started a project called Nawi Nawi. What, Barbara, am I getting the names right?
And there was another person who I can't remember, who was actually also read at her funeral, that was also involved, and Amina Mama as well. There were these, it was to do with a festival. Yeah.
And it was a writing project bringing together African-American women and women from the continent, right? And I think that is so important, right? that's part of the Pan-Africanist project, to bring together African people wherever they are and to recognize that we've been separated because of slavery, because of colonization, because of migration, and we are more powerful when we come together. And she exemplified that, you know. And for me, that's also something that I do consciously in my work, is the reason why my book included women from Costa Rica, from Barbados, from the States, from the UK, as well as, you know, people from Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria. That was deliberate. And it was also deliberate not to call it Sex Lives of Black Women, but Sex Lives of African Women, right? Because I'm recognizing the connection to the continent. And again, with Ama Ata Aidoo's work, and Barby spoke about this, right? Even in terms of the woman who featured in her books and her poems, she looked at the lives of women from different socioeconomic groups. And I think also she was able to draw on her own life as somebody who was very connected to her village, you know, and even though she herself was from a fairly high socioeconomic group, in the sense that, I mean, she's royalty in Ghana, you know, she could somehow portray women, for example, market traders, in ways where you saw the full complexity of their beings. And I think that was a beautiful thing about her work, right? Yeah. And I feel like it's just an inspiration to always connect the dots. Yeah. At least for me.
That's gorgeous. And I just echo that. I think that's really important. I might have to ask you to reiterate the question, because I just looked it up, but it was it's the Organization of Women Writers of Africa. So it was, that she started with Jane Cortez, and also like another brilliant person, Jane Cortez, like, you know, musician and stuff. But you remind me of the question again.
Yeah, so how does Aidoo's work and political thought help us to think about and address themes of gender, race and class, and even nationality and other things?
Yeah, I'd agree 100% with what Nana has pointed out, in terms of, I think she has, you know, she embodies a Pan-Africanism, which is like transcultural, which is going across all these different spaces from her experiences, and she wants to, even right up until her death, when Kina gave her speech about her mother, she was talking about her mother not being able to use her eyes, but but she was listening to a lot of actually sci-fi, and the kind of newer, younger sci-fi writers as well. So actually also like broadening and thinking about kind of quite complex things. I also want to just like give a little shout out to the Drama Queens, the group that I met when I was in Ghana, who are a group of young women, mostly queer, kind of, who are really kind of grounding their work, I would say, in a legacy of Ama Ata Aidoo. In fact, when I was there, they did a session. They were also thinking a lot about being in study with Ama's work, right, and kind of building on that in a different way, obviously, because they like mostly work in theatre, though they do writing and do other kinds of events for people. But I think, you know, this legacy kind of goes on. I think even despite maybe a bit of the shade that, you know, like, oh, this woman's quiet now, but she's not quiet, because she lives on in all of us, and in the ways in which we kind of take her work forward, you know, through the kind of the ways in which we write or we make work, or with the case of the Drama Queens, how they're starting to kind of seed their own practices in Ghana right now.
Thank you. That was perfect. And I also just want to kind of just stop the conversation just for a moment to say thank you also, Barbara, for taking the time to even do shout outs, and Nana. I think that's so important, incredibly, especially in this space, in this conversation that we're having. It's really, really important. I see your commitment to paying homage, and I think that's really beautiful and really powerful. So thank you for that contribution. I do see a hand up. We're coming to our final questions. So it's a good place for me to now reiterate that if you do have questions, keep a hold of them. There is going to be a Q&A at the end of the session where you'll be able to ask your questions. Okay, let's move on a little bit. So we've been speaking about, the relationship between politics and art, and, Pan-Africanism and feminism and that relationship too. I want to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works as we come to the next question. And that is, some may say, this isn't necessarily my point or belief or argument, but some have argued that women have been consistently erased from the history of Pan-Africanism, probably the early history of Pan-Africanism. Despite their incredible contributions, there are Pan-African feminists or feminist Pan-Africanists who really had to navigate really complex positions around gender and race and nationality and class and all these things. And I think it's really important to note that there has been a presence of active women from the start of Pan-Africanism. Amy Ashwood Garvey, who was the first wife of Marcus Garvey, Claudia Jones, Funmilayo Ransom Kuti, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name, it's off the top of my head. So there has been women who have been at the center and foundations of Pan-Africanism, but they have somewhat, some may argue, they have somewhat been erased from that history. I want us now to come and think about what it means to talk and think about African feminism specifically, and how does this resonate in transnational contexts, including the UK? Is the erasure or lack of presence in history? How does that inform African feminisms today? Does it inform African feminisms today? So what does it mean to talk and think about African feminism specifically? And you can bring this in transnational contexts as well, including the UK. So I will go back. We're going back and forward. So I'll go back to you, Nana.
That's an interesting question. And what I think is there's been a lot of incredible documentation and writing and more broad documentation, including film, video, audio by African feminists, commemorating and honoring our African feminist ancestors and also documenting their own work. I think the challenge is structural, right? The reasons why sometimes people may not be as aware of the work of African feminists is structural. If I'm thinking about the publishing industry, I feel like African feminists have just historically not been given the same platforms that their peers in other countries have. And so their work hasn't always become popular, where their work gets known as much, unless you are specifically seeking out that work, and they have actually responded by creating their own platforms, their own journals, where they are talking about platforms like Feminist Africa, even right now, a more contemporary platform like africanfeminisms.com. And so if you are really wanting to learn about your Pan-African feminist ancestors, that information is out there because African feminists have done the work of documenting. And at the same time, distribution is a challenge, right? And so if you don't have access to global distribution channels, sometimes your work doesn't reach, I think, the maximum audience that it needs to reach. And for me, that is actually the bigger issue. Yeah.
I really agree with you in that way, because the what do you call it? The movement doesn't go both ways, right? It's very hard for people, we know this more and more, you have a conference usually that is in the West, right? And the ways that we can go to, because I went to a conference in Ghana, ways we can do that and ways that African scholars can move back and forth is not the same. It's not equal for a start. The other thing I would say is I think the other thing is to think when we start to think about that, we need to think differently about how we define feminism and what it's doing, because I think we have things in the African continent, and also I think in a diaspora feminism. For one, I think some people would like reject the use of it because they would think of it more as this kind of Western concept. But also at the same time, as I think we have feminisms that, and she uses the term feminisms, not feminism, that are not necessarily defined as feminism, right? Practices that are not necessarily ways in which women are in cooperative, support of each other, and things like that, which I think is really a distinct way in which I think a lot of when we start to define a kind of Black feminism or a womanism, we're trying to think about practices of care and accountability, and even in some cases abolition, right, that are kind of about shaping a world differently, and also responding to the patriarchy, right, taking care of ourselves, like, you know, in terms of like things like domestic violence, or, you know, things like that. And I think women are constantly doing that. Yes, erasure, maybe, but maybe also we don't need it to be on those mainstream platforms. You know, what I would say is I do think it takes a lot to kind of like, say, republish a book or something like that. And I know lots of people who are trying to do that, because, you know, many books, people want to read these books now. But I think definitely, you know, we need to think. I think also, I'm going to just call from like Alice, do we want to be in exactly the same position as our white feminist sisters, or not sisters, whatever? Do we want to be like asking to be the same as the white men? You know, don't we want to define the forms, the ways in which we want to be in the world, and want to position ourselves in the world, as Ama says, you know, in the Declaration of Independence, in her declaration, like, it's painful, but I'm declaring myself and refusing your position. So I think we should also, like, I think it's all right that some of our feminisms are fugitive, are kind of under, you know, I think that's okay. That's organizing for us, not organizing for them.
Yeah. Wow, what a really powerful point to kind of draw us to close there. And it gives us much to think about, because even me, I kind of identify as an African eco-womanist. I do a lot of work in eco-criticism, and I look at the, you know, the kind of connections between the contributions that African women made in shaping and you know, kind of environmental practices that are healing and transformative from before the point of slavery, and how that was, you know, used then during slavery as resistance techniques. And so it's really, really important to say, yes, it's okay to have fugitive feminisms, as you said, and to define ourselves in ways that is safe, I think, is the important thing there. So thank you so much. I'm very conscious of time.
And I'm going to add, and sexy.
Yes, of course. Of course, that goes without saying. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I do have a final question, but I'm just going to stop here, just to allow everybody to just remember that if you have questions, either write them in the chat, or we're gonna open it up to that you can just unmute, and we'll maybe Lydia can come in and speak a little bit about how we're going to do the Q&A. But the final question that I want to ask, and if you could say this in as concise and few words as possible, is how can we think about the creative and political legacies that Ama Ata Aidoo leaves behind? And specifically, if you could answer, what guidance would you offer audience members who desire to make their own meaningful impact, either particularly in art and politics or otherwise? What guidance would you offer us who desire to make our own meaningful impact?
I think my guidance would be to reiterate what Ama Ata Aidoo shared with the group and during the writing workshop, which is just to be, and the art will flow from your being. It will flow from who you are, how you identify, whether you're identifying as, you know, an ecofeminist, womanist, or an African feminist. Just be, right? And just, you know, focus on doing you. is what I would say.
Thank you.
I think Nana said it. Nana said it. It's about authenticity, right? And I think that the tricky thing is to navigate that as an African woman in the world, is to actually navigate your authenticity and to present it. And I think that's the key. So I follow Nana 100% and Ama.
Nana, Barbara, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. As I've just been, trying to guide us through this discussion, I've just been thinking about how your work, both of your works, has greatly inspired me, but it also encouraged me to continue the work that I'm doing in ways that, and I'm really going to take away. There's two things I'm going to take away. One thing that you said, Nana, is that you write because you're a feminist, and that art is centrally a part of our being. And Barbara, I was also struck by the idea that art is almost autobiography. I love that. And I'll definitely be citing you both in that regard. So thank you so much for such a warm, inviting, powerful discussion. We've been reflecting on the legacy of Ama Ata Aidoo, but really in thinking about how we are not only just a part of that legacy or the kind of fruits of that legacy, but how we can take on our own work and think about the meaningful impact that it might have on others. So thank you so much. I know the audience members are muted and probably have their videos off, but I'm sure they're joining me and giving you a round of applause right now. Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Lydia, who's going to explain the Q&A, and I'll come back and chair the question section just to explain how we're going to do this.
Sure. Thank you so much, Renee. Just to say, I mean, I had my camera off during the conversation, but I thought my head was going to fall off because I was nodding so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Renee. And I'm going to throw that thanks right back to you as well. And thank you for wonderful, really sensitive, warm, generous chairing of this session. And to just respond to Silu's question in the Q&A there, if you'd like to see an event like that, please send us an email. Say how much you enjoyed this one and that you'd like to see more. And you can find out how to contact us by looking at our website, which is www.thefeministcenter.org. So I'm just going to say thank you again to Nana, to Barbie, and to Renee. Thank you to everyone who joined this session as audience. We really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and I wish you all a wonderful evening or rest of the day, depending on where you are. Thank you so much.